Just after midnight, in this quiet Pimpama street, Shane Bowden was shot dead outside his own home.
Imagine being gunned down in your own driveway, shot multiple times in a cold-blooded attack. This was the fate of Shane Bowden, a notorious figure in the world of Australian bikie gangs. On October 12, 2020, Bowden was murdered in broad daylight, execution style, outside his Gold Coast home. But why? Was it a personal vendetta? A power struggle between rival gangs? Or something even darker at play? The murder of Bowden is a twisted story of betrayal, rivalries, and gang wars, and it's still unraveling. Stick around because you're about to hear a tale that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. This isn't just another biker story. This is the shocking end of a life marked by violence and loyalty. Shane Bowden wasn't your average guy. He wasn't a businessman or a lawyer, and you definitely wouldn't find him working a 9-to-5 job. Instead, Bowden was a central figure in the world of outlaw motorcycle gangs, OMCGs, a place where loyalty, power, and violence go hand in hand. He wasn't just part of the Finks, he was a key player. And if there's one thing you need to know about this world, it's that it's brutal. Born in Australia, Bowden had always lived a life on the edge. His ties to the Finks were strong, but things weren't always so simple. Before he was with the Finks, he was with the Mongols, a rival bikie gang. Now, imagine a world where betrayal is just another part of the game, where switching sides is more common than you might think. Bowden's move from the Mongols to the Finks was a classic example of the tension that simmers in these gangs. Gangs fight for territory, for control, and sometimes for sheer dominance. Bowden had lived through it all. But what sets Bowden apart from other bikie? For one, he was no stranger to trouble. He had a reputation. Whether it was dealing with rival gangs, living through violent confrontations, or facing the constant threat of law enforcement, Shane Bowden's life was always on the edge. He was known as a hardcore player in the game, someone who knew how to handle pressure, and more importantly, knew how to make enemies. Despite his reputation, there was another side to Bowden, one that his family and friends knew well. Behind the tough exterior, Bowden was a father and a grandfather. He had kids, and he loved spending time with his grandchildren. In fact, it was for his family that Bowden ultimately wanted to leave the violence of his gang life behind. Yet, when you've lived a life like Bowden's, it's hard to escape your past. But could Bowden ever truly leave that world behind? Or was his fate already sealed? As the story of Bowden's life shows, sometimes the past has a way of catching up with you, no matter how much you try to outrun it. The world of bikie, where power shifts and alliances are never set in stone, is unforgiving. And for Bowden, it was about to get a lot darker. The world he had spent so many years entrenched in would eventually lead to his brutal downfall. But what exactly happened on the night of October 12, 2020, would leave even the toughest bikie stunned. This wasn't just any murder, this was an execution. Shane Bowden was about to pay the ultimate price for his past. On the night of October 12, 2020, Shane Bowden had no idea that he was about to meet his end. It started like any other evening. After a late-night workout at the gym, Bowden was heading home to his house in Pimpama, a quiet part of the Gold Coast. His routine was nothing out of the ordinary, but what was about to happen would shatter everything. Around 12:10 a.m., Bowden pulled into his driveway, completely unaware that two men were waiting for him. These men weren't just passing through. They had been tracking him for weeks. They knew where he'd be, when he'd be home, and how to strike without hesitation. As soon as Bowden got out of his car, they moved quickly, ambushing him in the driveway. Point-blank shots were fired, hitting him multiple times in the head and chest. The attack was sudden, precise, and brutal, an execution-style killing. There was no room for survival. The killers didn't hang around. They knew exactly what they were doing and quickly disappeared into the night, leaving only a bloodied scene and a growing mystery in their wake. Shane Bowden was dead, but the question remained, who would want to kill him? Was it connected to his past in the world of outlaw bikie? Was it an old enemy settling a score? Or did something even darker lie behind his death? As police arrived at the scene, they quickly realized this wasn't a random act of violence. The more they examined Bowden's life, the more it became clear that he had made some powerful enemies, particularly from the gang he had once belonged to, the Mongols. Bowden's switch from the Mongols to the Finks, a rival gang, had likely stirred up tensions. But could it be the only reason for his death? But it wasn't just about gang rivalries. The police uncovered that Bowden had been under careful surveillance before his death. His car had been fitted with a GPS tracker, and for weeks, someone had been following his every move. Whoever was behind the killing had clearly planned it out in advance. It wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision. This wasn't just another bikie gang murder. It was something more methodical, something more chilling. The killers knew Bowden's routine, and when the right time came, they struck without mercy. Whoever had ordered Bowden's death had sent a powerful message, not just to Bowden, but to everyone who might have been watching. But the police were left with more questions than answers. Why was he targeted so ruthlessly? Was this about more than just his affiliation with one gang over another? The investigation was just getting started, but it was already clear that the mystery of Shane Bowden's murder was far from simple. With Shane Bowden's murder sending shockwaves through the Gold Coast and beyond, the investigation quickly ramped up. Detectives were on the hunt for clues, but the case wasn't going to be easy. The world Bowden had been part of wasn't one known for helping the police. In fact, it was a world that thrived on secrecy and loyalty. Loyalty to the gang, and a code of silence that made it nearly impossible to get answers. As the police dug deeper, one startling fact came to light. Bowden had been under constant surveillance for weeks. It wasn't just a random, spur-of-the-moment killing. No, his death was planned, calculated. His car had been fitted with a GPS tracker, and someone had been following his every move. The killers didn't just happen upon him that night. They knew exactly when he'd be home, when he'd be vulnerable. This wasn't just a murder, it was an execution. But who had the resources to track him like that? Who could afford to spend weeks tailing a high-profile bikie? The answer wasn't clear yet, but the more the police dug, the more connections started to emerge. In the midst of this, a major breakthrough came from a surprising source. A prison informant, one of Bowden's associates who had been locked up at the time of the murder, came forward with explosive information. The informant claimed that Joshua James Small, a man with links to the underworld, had confessed to being involved in the murder. According to the informant, Small had been paid $120,000 to carry out the hit on Bowden. That kind of money could only come from someone with serious power in the criminal world. But it wasn't just the money that made things even more intriguing. Small reportedly told the informant that Bowden's death wasn't just a random hit. It was tied to the ongoing war between the Mongols and the Finks. It seemed Bowden's decision to leave the Mongols and join the Finks had created a serious ripple effect in the gang world. When you switch sides in that world, it's more than just a shift in allegiance. It's a betrayal that can't be ignored. The police knew the Mongols had a motive. Bowden was a former member who had turned his back on them, and for the Mongols, betrayal was something that couldn't be forgiven. If Bowden had turned on them and joined their rivals, it was no surprise that they might want him gone. But was that all there was to it? The more the police listened to the informants, the more it seemed like Bowden's death was part of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle that involved more than just gang rivalry. The police were also digging into CCTV footage around the Pimpama area. The recordings didn't capture the killers' faces, but they did provide clues. Shane Bowden's murder had been quick, organized, and precise. It was clear the attackers knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't just about revenge. It was a statement, one that hinted at something much larger. But what? Was it about gaining control of the Gold Coast's underworld? Or was it something more personal, a deep, unresolved conflict buried within Bowden's past? With the pieces starting to fall into place, the police were facing one of their most complicated cases yet. No one wanted to talk. Those who knew what happened weren't willing to help. The people who lived in the world Bowden had been part of were either too afraid or too loyal to say anything. The investigation was moving forward, but at a snail's pace. As the days went on, the pain of Bowden's death became harder for his family to bear. He wasn't just a bikie, he was a father, a grandfather, and a man with connections beyond the gangs. His family was left in shock, trying to understand how their loved one, a man who'd been a part of their lives, had been struck down so violently. But as the police began to piece together the threads of Bowden's life and death, they started to uncover more than they expected. The killing had sent ripples through the bikie community, and slowly, the walls of silence were starting to crack. The truth was out there, but it was proving to be more elusive than anyone had imagined. As the investigation into Shane Bowden's murder continued, the walls surrounding the case began to crack. Detectives were working tirelessly, piecing together a story that seemed both more complicated and more dangerous than anyone had expected. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that Bowden's murder was just the tip of the iceberg. a key piece of a much larger, much darker world of gang violence, betrayal, and power struggles. The informant's revelation about Joshua James Small and the $120,000 contract for Bowden's killing was just one piece of the puzzle. But as the police dug deeper, they found links between Bowden's murder and a series of other unsolved crimes tied to the Mongols and the Finks. This was not just about one man. This was a brutal message being sent from one gang to another, a message about power, loyalty, and control. Despite the silence of the underworld, small details started to surface. Bowden's close associates began to distance themselves, their loyalty to him shaken by his past and the complex alliances that had formed around him. The fact that Bowden had once been a key member of the Mongols and had later shifted allegiances to the Finks meant he wasn't just a victim of random violence. His death had purpose. The gang rivalry was real, and it was deadly. But what made Bowden's death even more unsettling was the growing suspicion that it wasn't just about gangs. The Mongols and the Finks were embroiled in a full-blown war, but there was more going on beneath the surface. Police began to suspect that Bowden had knowledge of something far more dangerous, something that might have led to his demise. It was a case of betrayal, not just between gangs, but within them. The silence, the lack of cooperation, pointed to a deep-seated fear in the gang world. People knew who was responsible for Bowden's murder, but no one was willing to speak out. Fear, loyalty, and intimidation kept everyone quiet. But the police weren't giving up. Slowly, the investigation gained momentum. Detectives gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses who were still willing to come forward, and most importantly, they kept their focus on the core issue, the connection between Bowden's death and the tangled web of gang politics. They knew it was only a matter of time before they uncovered the truth. Then, a breakthrough came. A critical witness came forward, someone who had been close to Bowden and had seen the events leading up to the murder. This witness provided the final piece of the puzzle. They confirmed that Shane Bowden had been more involved in the criminal world than anyone had realized, and that someone within the Finks, not just the Mongols, had ordered his death. It was a power struggle at its core. Bowden had been perceived as a potential threat to the Finks' leadership, someone who might try to take control. As the police gathered evidence, more names came to light, people who had been complicit in the planning and execution of the murder. Slowly, the chain of command within the Finks and the Mongols was exposed. The truth was darker than anyone had imagined, and the repercussions of Bowden's murder would continue to affect both gangs for years to come. Shane Bowden's death had been a turning point, not just for his family, but for the entire bikie community. His murder set off a chain reaction of events that would reverberate through the Gold Coast and beyond. For the police, Bowden's death was the beginning of a larger investigation into gang-related violence that would take years to fully uncover. His killers were brought to justice, but they were only part of a much larger puzzle that would continue to unfold. But the real impact of Shane Bowden's death wasn't just in the gang world. It was felt by the people who knew him best, his family. Bowden wasn't just a notorious figure in the bikie world. He was a father, a grandfather, and a man with connections to a world that most people would never understand. His family was left to pick up the pieces, trying to make sense of the violence that had stolen their loved one from them. In the end, Shane Bowden's murder wasn't just about one man's death. It was a reflection of the dangerous, high-stakes world he had chosen to live in. A world where loyalty meant everything, and betrayal could cost you your life. His death was a brutal reminder of how easily life could be lost in a world ruled by power, violence, and fear. But despite the darkness surrounding his life, Bowden's family still mourned the man they knew. They remembered him not just as a bikie, but as a grandfather who loved his grandkids, a father who had tried to provide for his family in a world that didn't always make it easy. His death left an irreplaceable hole in their lives, a loss they'd never fully recover from. Bowden may have been taken out in a violent and calculated way, but his legacy and the ripple effect of his death would continue to play out in the years to come. The investigation may have uncovered the truth, but the consequences of his murder were far from over. In the end, Shane Bowden's story wasn't just one of crime and betrayal. It was a warning about the danger of living in a world where trust is fragile and loyalty can turn deadly in an instant.